the work. I'll try to cover as many bases that are more like technical, and then I'll talk about my art practice, and then I'm going to open it up. And I really feel like the value that I have for all of you is that I'm living the life, and anything you ever wanted to know about being an artist, you can ask me. I don't have any secrets, and I'm really happy to share. I think someone asked me recently, like, what's the secret to your success? And I would say the biggest secret is having mentors and having curators who advocate for you. Those are my secrets. So it's really about relationship building and authentic relationships. People who are like crazy about you and crazy about your work. So I always say, don't be shy, ask people to help you, because you cannot do this yourself. It's just not beginning to be possible. So on that note, let me just start to tell you a little bit about all the layers, the technical part of this work and what it's about. I read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Does that name ring a bell for anybody? One. When I was a young woman, like in my 20s, and it was the first. Now we're used to reading books that are science books for like the general public, like you don't need a PhD to understand them. But she was the very first person who wrote a book, and in this case it was about how songbirds were dying because of DDT. And she was tracking how DDT was beginning to collapse the ecosystem of birds. This was in the 1960s. Obviously, we didn't listen too much, but we did ban DDT in the United States. Of course, I'm sure they still import it to the rest of the world. And so I started a long, lifelong passion about birds. And in recent years, as we've all become more aware and horrified by climate change, I realize that there's just still so many birds that are vanishing. And I say birds, but I kind of mean all species. Like, we're having an extinction, we're having a collapse of a lot of different species collapse. I have a particular soft spot for birds, but in a sense they're like a stand-in for all of the other fallout from what's happening in our climate, in our world. So my work is primarily about endangered birds, and in the course of my research, I'm a very research-based artist, the things that were contributing to the extinction or the collapse of certain bird populations was the same thing, coincidentally, that was contributing to the destruction of indigenous culture, especially indigenous languages. So here's a little factoid for you. Currently, there are 7,000 languages spoken around the world. And by 2100, there'll be 3,000 languages spoken around the world. So we are, in your lifetime, sadly, losing more than half of the world's languages. And my parents were immigrants to this country from Eastern Europe, and their first language was Yiddish. And when they first came to the United States, there was still this robust Yiddish culture on the Lower East Side, and that's gone. And I think I got this sensitivity about the loss of culture just from my own, watching the ebbing away of my own culture, and seeing that they weren't even willing to pass that language down, because to them it was like the language of the ghetto, and they didn't want to be thinking about, the Holocaust and, losing everything they lost, in their process of getting to the United States. But in the process of trying to assimilate, they contributed to their own disappearance, in a sense. But I think that's part of the story of immigration around the world. And so, my work, as you look more closely at my work, you're going to see little bits and pieces of birds, but you're also going to see bits and pieces of languages. in many cases printed over the birds. So when I was speaking to my colleague Rita just a little while ago, she said, well, isn't it sad when you have to cut up all the images? And I want to be sure to say this, that I'm an abstract artist. And so my work isn't meant to be that literal, more evocative, I would say, than literal. And so they're cut up. Can you read them exactly? Not exactly, but if you look closely, it's all there. So let me just take you through the layers, because there's so many of them. All my work now, since 2017, instead of fiber, which I used my whole life because I was trained at FIT and I was a wallpaper designer, and I always used textiles and I always made all my clothes, like all fiber people, right? And I changed up using textiles, and I, over a course of a year, decided to start working in plastic, recycled plastic, because I felt that by using recycled plastic, I was embedding a whole lot of information about like the degradation of the planet by just using plastic. I'm like talking about something that's silent but is there. So I use recycled plastic, which is part of the relentless consumption that's driving the loss of the habitat, certainly of birds, but of humans as well. Because of so much pollution and all the things I don't need to go over. You know all of that. So I have, as part of my wonderful studio in Mexico, I have a section of the studio that's just for screen printing. And one of the things that I think you'll find in your own work over time, you don't always understand your own work. Like you do your work, you feel passionate, you feel pulled in a certain direction to do something about this and in this material. But you might not really understand why you do it. It is only over many years that you go, oh, that makes sense. So now I'm screen printing. I was screen printing 40 years ago when I was a wallpaper designer. So in a way, I've come all the way full circle, even in my own experience. Instead of doing digital printing or something that's more like contemporary, I'm back to hand silk screening. So I have a team of women that do that. So we start with recycled plastic, often recycled plastic bags that are thin, that are fused together. So we use a dry iron, and of course you can't put the iron on the plastic because it would melt. So there's glassine paper that sandwiches the layers. There may be 3 layers, 5 layers, 6 layers. It depends on the thickness of the plastic. And gets sandwiched with the dry iron, and the heat of the iron melts the plastic together. Okay? So right away, there's the issue of what colors am I putting together that in a sense is like mixing paint. So I wish I had this to show you, but I have, actually from my FIT years, I have these books of like, how do I make this color? Well, it's black plastic and pink plastic and blue plastic, and when that's all melted together, it becomes the color that I want. And it might have black on one side, it might have blue on the other side. Often there's 2 different colors going on. So there's that color mixing that starts. So now we have a page of plastic that we've created through this heat process. And you can see stuff like that, I think, on YouTube, how you fuse plastic. People make purses and stuff out of that, right? Then, because we're going to screen print, they have to put on a thin layer of like a glue in order for the ink to adhere to the plastic, because ink is going to bubble up on most things are going to bubble up on plastic. So we use a glue that helps the ink to grab on to the plastic. So we have to do both sides of that, and they have to dry. Then, let me see if I can have this in order. Okay, then we have all the silk screens. So now I have to do a quick little sidebar. So all the birds that you might actually see and hear grow out of my drawings, at my research about endangered birds. I try to go to a residency, an artist residency once a year, even though I live in paradise and it's amazing. I need to get away every 12 or 18 months and get away from all my wonderful people and just do the research and just draw the birds. And if you follow me on Instagram, and I hope you will, it's Deborah Kruger Studios with an S. And this is, I'm also teaching you to market yourself, okay? Deborah Kruger Studios with an S, please follow me. You'll see some posts of me drawing. You'll see the drawing is kind of becoming alive, because I'll like draw a little bit and I'll shoot, and I'll draw a little bit and I'll shoot. So we get a little real. So I have these very complex drawings that are then, with my full-time assistant, Sandra, we reduce them to like a silhouette. And that becomes part of the silk screen. I have many, many, many silk screens at this point. So I'm gonna have a silk screen that has like 4 different birds. And then I also have silk screens now with the endangered languages, which I'm always collecting. I mentioned that I live in central Mexico. I had a trip to Chiapas, which is in the southern part of Mexico, where there's still strong Mayan culture, still a lot of hand weaving. If you have an opportunity to go there, you gotta go there if you're a textile person. Plus I have a great textile museum. Wish they did in the show. And I met an ethno-linguist, and he and his graduate students started to help me collect the languages, and then I would have people handwrite them. Those languages that are written, of course, there's a lot of indigenous languages that are not written, but many of these were. And I would work with a calligrapher to develop the calligraphy that echoed the handwriting of the person who just did their sort of raw, as we say in Spanish, rudo. It's just like raw writing, and develop something that honors the look of that, but looks distinctive. So later, as we go closer into the work, I can point out some of these languages. So I have a number of those. And now I'll like do the silk screen, and then when it's dry, do the overprint. Not every single one, but many of them have overprints. And then I have to program the printing for the other side, because we print on both sides. And then what do? At that point, I work with 2 different sewers in the neighborhood. And let me do another sidebar and say, I absolutely love employing Mexican women. And as I look back, and this is the thing about understanding yourself over a longer period of time, I've always done work with women. Even when I was a girl, we would sew all of our clothes and we'd go, oh, we have that bar mitzvah coming up. I don't have a dress, I just had growth spurt, you know. So we would all go down in the basement and we would sew a dress for whoever needed, or school clothes, or that sort of thing. So that was my first sort of like working together with women sweatshop thing. Then I tell this funny story. I think you'll find it on some of my YouTube channels. If you go to YouTube, please subscribe. Like, we have to monetize. We have to like support ourselves here, right? So when my son was like 10 or 11, he was like, Mom, I have to talk to you about something. I'm very upset. I think you're a sexist. I was like, really? What do you think that about me? He said, well, you have this business, and the only people who work there are women. Like, you don't ever hire men. So it was a medical billing company. So we had to have that big conversation about like white collar, blue collar, pink collar. And I said, your mother is in a pink collar kind of business. And just by the way, I never made a really great living as a designer. And so for me, just doing something completely different, I always had really strong math skills for some odd reason. And so I just worked with numbers and something very, very different, so that when I had time in the studio, I felt fresh. That was really important to me. I felt exhausted as a designer. I was like, oh God, I'm thinking about like designing color all week long, the last thing I wanted to do was go into my studio. I was like really tired. So that's what worked for me. I'm not saying that's a solution for anyone, but that was how I supported myself and raised a family, because I was a single mom. So, okay, so I'm not a sexist anymore. Oh, I know, I called my son when he was in college and I told him I hired my first man. And I was no longer a sexist, so he had a good laugh. So, at this point we have pages, just like paper pages, and some people think this is paper, or they think it's fabric, and that makes me really happy that I'm still really involved, not only in the fiber world, but I mean, I'm getting to fiber shows all over the world, so they still read this as fiber, even though it's literally plastic. So in that sense of materiality and textility and the things like what makes something fiber, it doesn't matter what it's made out of anymore. It's just like, does it read like fiber? So it makes me happy that it still reads like fiber. So now we have a stack of maybe like 40, 60, 80 sheets that are all printed the same. And we bring them to a sewer, one sewer that's in the neighborhood, Eunice, and she has a free arm. So she does these like round kind of, but I also curate the color. They ask me like, hey, Elo, kids, what color do you want? It's like, well, that one needs gold, and that one needs red, and that one needs lime. So I'm actually also right down to everything, really thinking about color and what goes together. So she does the round, and it accomplishes two things. First of all, we're going to cut these things up. I'll get that in a minute. But as you cut them up, the integrity loosens up a little bit, and so if they're sewn, they hold together a little bit better. So that's a technical reason to sew. But also, because I'm a fiber person, I want to put some fabric back into it. So that makes me happy in terms of having like my thing in there, fabric. Okay, now it comes back to the studio, and I lay it out. I think I'm going to have to I'll use this piece as an example. So these are shorter, these are medium, and these are longer, okay? So in order to get the lengths, I have to sew several sheets together. So I pin the sheets, and they go to another sewer who does a better job with I need 3 stitches across. 2 wasn't enough. We had a lot of breakage. Things were falling off. I was like, I don't want to be in a museum, and then they're saying, like, what's that down there? So, there's always technical things that you have to deal with. So in order to get the lengths, then I pin 2 or 3 together, so I get my lengths. Take it to the second sewer who does the horizontal sewing, 3 and 3. Comes back, and then I design a collection of short, medium, and longer colors that in my mind go together. And another woman in the studio. Okay, here's the other thing. So in Mexico, if you hire one person, so I have Alicia, so she's like the main screen printer. So who prints with her? Her sister. Okay, great. And then who does the cutting? Her daughter-in-law. So it just becomes like these big family circles, and I'm back to feeling like, oh, it's just a family thing, just have like all the women doing their thing. So Samantha sews across the top. I taught her how to sew. I love to not only empower them, but to give them more skills. I don't assume they'll work for me for the rest of their lives, although it couldn't bother me. And then she does the cutting. People seem to have migrated into things that they have some sense of ownership around. So I tell this funny story. I told you at the beginning that we sandwich things between glassine. I can get glassine paper in Mexico, but one time when I visited my daughter in Durham, North Carolina, I ordered some glassine from Dick Blick. I brought that down. So then they're like, wow, we really prefer the Dick Blick to the stuff that they make in Mexico. It's like, okay, Dick Blick, good. So every time I go, up to the States, I have to order a roll. Well, I did order a roll to help. So I have rolls back here that we're going to use when we wrap up our work tomorrow, when we take the show down. But they're also like, you're bringing back Dick Blick, right? I was like, yeah. So first of all my work is built on a Pellon background. Pellon, if you do any sewing, Pellon is often used in sewing to stiffen collars, and that's not so popular anymore, but anyway, I'm dating myself, but anything to help the structure of the work. It would have a thinner kind of Pellon, but I take the heaviest gauge Pellon I can get my hands on, and I screen print it, and they also, you can see it's not white. Why? Because I told them, here's all the colors I want, like rub it in with your hands or with, I'm like, really? I was like, yeah, go have some fun, rub in all the colors. So they're like, okay. So that if the background shows, I want it to be integrated into the work. So it's not part of the work, but it's kind of structurally part of the work. And I'll say as an aside, because I want to remember to talk to you about this, now that I'm doing much larger work, this is all what I consider small to medium work. Now I'm doing like really huge environmental work, and the work that was acquired by the museum is like 12 feet across and 8 feet. I mean, it's enormous. And I'm about to bring a second piece that's 14 feet across to a show in Toronto. Hold that thought, I'll get to it in a minute. So those groups of colors that I talked about, here's some good examples. So here's a little cluster of different colors that are hand sewn. So there's always sewing involved in this. I just feel like, you know what? There's nothing better than hand sewing. You can use any glue in the world, but hand sewing is hand sewing. It's gonna stick. Another example of keeping handmade things alive, because they're all disappearing. So that's an important part of how the pieces are made. So when Samantha's cutting all of those, we lay them out on the wall. If you follow my Instagram, Deborah Kruger Studios with an S, you'll see some studio shots where you see like big swaths of like black, or big swaths of blue. Why? That's my palette. I'm planning to do some really large work that's black. I mean, it's not just black, it's going to be every color, but it will read as black. So I'm months and months ahead of building those. I'm already, doing the silk screening and building up the palette, so that when I'm ready to start these pieces, I've got the materials. And here I am telling you all of these different things. It's like, oops, I ran out of a color. Well, that's too bad for you, because it takes 2 weeks to get that back. So that's why I order things ahead in like 100, I'll say 100 pages of this or 80 pages of this. I don't stint with how much. And I'm super, super lucky to have this artist practice. I didn't intend to move to Mexico. I had sort of a big financial setback, and I thought, well, if I live cheaply in Mexico, I can kind of like regroup. But now I think, the universe had another plan for me, and it was like, move to Mexico, become a full-time artist. Now you can afford the studio of your dreams and this whole team. So that was the gift of this financial disaster that I had that got me to move to Mexico, because now I'm living like, you just can't even believe how fabulous it is. So I feel like immensely lucky for everything that's happened, even though it was born out of some of the disaster. But the other thing I want to show you with this piece. So the Museum of Arts and Design came and picked up my piece Accidentals sometime this summer. And I thought, I'd already just been invited to show a similar piece that was white, more like a white piece like that, at this big festival in Toronto. And I thought, I'll get an estimate, like what would it cost to do the crating and shipping and move it from Mexico up to Toronto. You want to take a wild guess what that cost? Take a wild guess. How many thousands of them? 19,000. You know what? $12,000, right? To move the work. Oh my, hello? Who's got? So, would they say, what is the mother of invention? What's the expression?
Necessity.
Necessity is the mother of invention. And I come from the sewing family, which I've already told you about my sewing family. Well, my mother and her twin, they're gone now, although they live in me forever. And so we're thinking, like, how are we going to get this piece up to Toronto? Like, we're going to have to cut it in pieces and somehow reassemble it. Like, should we use Velcro or buttons? And I swear to God, one afternoon, me and my assistant Sandra emailed each other, it's timestamped, at the same minute, and we said, zippers? At the same minute. It was so crazy. So we're in the middle right now, as we speak. We've cut devotional, the big white piece, into 18 pieces. And here's how we attach them. Zippers! So this is the piece that we experimented on. So what I can do with a piece like this, when we unzip it, is that I can put this part on top of that part, and now the package is small. So now I'm going to send Sandra up to Toronto on October 3rd, I think, with 2 large, oversized packages. Admittedly, they cost extra money, $200 a piece. Paid for her ticket, found her a free place to stay, gave her an extra day to play in the city, and all of that is under $1,200. So, I'm sure my mother and my aunt are like, oh yeah, so what? We're never going to do the first thing. So, those are just things that we learn. We're constantly learning. Even in our own practice, it constantly evolves for all different reasons. In this case, it was the reason of needing to move the work around. But there's other things that you just learn because it's all about problem solving, right? Design problem solving, you will have to do that in your classes. So I think I'll pause here, see if I forgot anything. Did I forget anything I was talking about?
I wanted to ask you, how is it cut? Is it cut with like a rotary cutter?
No, by
scissors?
hand. By hand. Everything is by hand. And people have asked me, like, could you make that a faster, quicker? I said, I don't want to make it faster and quicker. I want to employ women. I want to give them jobs. I can afford to do that. I will say that even in Mexico, I probably spend between $40,000 and $50,000 a year just for my studio practice. So I could never afford that in the U.S., for sure. And I'm not talking about supporting myself. I have another revenue stream from me. But just to support all the people that work in the practice and ship things and ship myself and, that kind of thing. There's all of that still costs a lot of money. But at least I can afford it, almost every year. I'm really happy to answer any questions. I think your questions are going to sort of spark me to talk about other things. I can already see other things I want to talk about. This is an older, made out of these older materials, and this little one were both made. If you go up, you can see that there's still, like, we are who we are. You can't not be who you are. So your artwork is always going to be some reflection of who you are. You cannot escape that. You shouldn't want to. But you can see that the work from 2010, this one has a more recent date, but actually the materials date back to also 2010, 2011, back in there. And yet you can see my sensibility was intact. I was just able over time to develop, slowly develop this other way of working. But I think that's a good example of showing you that you are who you are. And that whatever you care and are passionate about, that is what you should do your work about, because then your work is going to be more compelling to other people as well. But you can't ever get away from that. You just can't, and nor should you. Because the more authentic your work is to you and what you care about, even if it's abstract, as this is, it will become more powerful, for sure. And this work, really be careful of what you wish for. because I have now achieved what I wished for, and it's completely a wild ride. I work 7 days a week, I'm not complaining, but it is a lot of work, and I need a lot of help. And I could not do this without all of the wonderful people helping me, including some wonderful men. So, I'm not sexist. I think I'll just pause there and open it up to questions. Anything. I have no secrets. You can ask me absolutely anything. Yes?
I have a question. When you were going to school, did you think or imagine you being where you are now and creating the work that you are now?
It's a great question. Did everyone hear the question? So absolutely not. I was the only artist, or I should certainly say, I was the very first artist in my family. People didn't know what to do with me. And I bet a lot of you were like that in your families, like you're the only one. And they're like, where did you come from? You know, and how are you going to earn a living? You know, that whole ridiculous conversation. But no. But here's where we go back to mentors. I was not very secure in myself at all. I was very shy, I hated talking to people, really hated it. Anyone, pretty much, except my best friends. And I didn't think very highly of myself. I just didn't, you know. But since I was a child, and certainly as I got to be in my teens and 20s, people who knew what was good in art said, you got it. You're good. And I thought, like, who am I to question that? They should know what they're talking about. So I always had confidence about my artwork. I never imagined I would be an international artist. Forget about that. That never even entered my mind. And it's only in the last, 8 or 10 years that that's happened. And the last few years have been like completely wild. I was in a show in Venice this spring. I mean, it's been really amazing. And I'm grateful. I wake up every day and I just say, am I grateful? So my husband was like, are you going to get up for coffee? And I'm like, I'm not ready yet. I still have some more grateful. So I'm very, very grateful for everything that's come. I don't take anything for granted. I hope that answers your question. Anyone else? You said you were going to.
Okay, yes. Okay, so the golden birds on that piece
Yes.
right there, are they a specific bird or are they just symbols?
Great question. Okay.
Aztec one.
Yes. Okay. So as I said, in most cases, the silk screens of birds are originally, they're distillations from my very, very detailed drawings. And they're sort of, we sort of shrink them down to silhouettes and they become the birds. But all of them, I mean, I might have a little brain lapse here, but all of them are endangered birds, and I can identify at least half of them on a good day. The Aztec birds are the Aztec cuneiform that you can find anywhere,
right.
but I just chose bird images for that one. Yeah.
Also, you can definitely, sorry.
Okay, question number 3.
So I'm a fashion merchandising major here, and so I wanted to ask about your school again too, but like what initially made you want to go there, and like what did you see for yourself at that point of your life?
That's a great question. I have a crazy story. Okay, I was born at a time that my family didn't actually think it was important to send girls to college. It was back then. I mean, I'm not even going to tell you how old I am, but it was like that back then. I was like super smart, and no one was like, you should apply to an Ivy League school. I was the top 5% of my class. So I had no direction. You can be an art teacher, you can be what? A nurse, something like that. I was like, I really was directionless. And I got married very, very early. I think just to kind of get away from my family. Now, I would not recommend that, but I did. I was a teenager, and my husband was still at college, and I was like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. So this is back in the day when college catalogs were like actual books, thick books. I don't think they have that anymore. And I decided I'm gonna go to the office, counseling office or career office, and get a little direction as like a student life, you know. So I walk in the office, and there's this big round table, and I'm waiting for my appointment, and it's just piled high with college catalogs from all over the United States. I swear this is an I Ching moment. I pull a catalog out of the pile, I open it up, and it says 1-year program in textile design at FIT. I was like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. Because it felt like right. It was like the universe, my parents didn't, but the universe was like, okay, let me help you with this. Because that was perfect, you know, fabric, sewing, you know, good strong design skills, you know, artistic. Okay, now we're talking. But I didn't even have any college. So I had to go and quickly get like those prereqs and stuff, but I got in, I showed them my portfolio, they took me like that, but I had to get all my prereqs, and I did a 1-year, very intensive 1-year program, maybe 16 months or 12 months or something, and got an associate's degree. It didn't exist then that you could get a textile design degree as a BFA. Forget about an MFA, forget about a doctoral. I mean, didn't exist. So it was just the beginning of the qualifying and honoring this part of creativity and became the art world. Well, now the art world is full of fiber. Everyone's using fiber, but that wasn't even true 10 years ago. It really wasn't. So I'm very grateful for my training that I had. I'm very grateful for the teachers that just said, you got it, you got it, you got it. And I'm like, okay. And I was a designer, and I did fine, but like I said, I didn't really enjoy designing. I mean, for myself. Oh, here's a lesson. So finally I'm like, okay, the hell with having an art director who's telling me like do this and do that. So I decided I'm gonna peddle my own wallpaper designs. And I go back to my teachers and I go like, how do you do this? I mean like, and so one of them was like, okay, I'm gonna give you the name of the top art director in the city who sells designs to all the top studios in New York. And you're gonna start at the top. And then if she doesn't take you, then you go to the next one and the next one and the next one. Instead of like working your way up, she was like, forget that. You start at the top. So I call this woman up thinking like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. And she accepts me. And I sold my work. And I have walked into restaurants and like, years ago.